Well, writing was me, so I suffered that alone. But Arie, every single draft, every single piece goes to Arie, and he gets to read it and send me back notes, and then I suffer a little bit more. But so that's sort of how it was before we got onto set. During pre-production, we were very much sharing ideas and thinking about our reference films and how we wanted to shoot it. These are discussions that were happening throughout, even before we got to pre-production, and very much on set. It was quite fluid. I think we had the opportunity to be two places at once. The simple way is Arie is a lot more visually inclined than I am. So more often than not, he was dealing with camera and lights and that sort of thing. Whereas I have more of a literary bent. So I would be more on set, speaking with the actors about the scene, character, that sort of stuff. But they were not by any means defined roles. There'd be plenty of times when Arie would have a note, he'd come up and give the note, and vice versa as well. If I had a thought with, where another option for shooting, and it was always that way and quite fluid.
Well, as Chuko said, I received every single draft that was written, and I think that was about 13. And throughout that process, there was a constant dialogue about our various visual references and how we wanted to approach shooting the film. And even in the writing and the rewriting, I think you already start making visual decisions, whether it's, keeping the same amount of locations that you have, or just switching up the scene to make it a bit more dynamic, including more people, and thinking along those lines. But we had very strong visual references going into the film. We watched a lot of new Taiwanese cinema. So, the likes of Ho Xiaoshen and Edward Yang, they were very big influences of ours. The Apu trilogy, just wonderful, wonderful films by, social realist filmmakers the world over. So yeah, we were constantly in dialogue about that. So I think there was never any time where we weren't doing both at the same time, if that makes sense. That was probably the most contentious part of the collaboration. But I use that word lightly. It was definitely, there were places where you're just like, oh no, it needs to be shorter. Do we need the scene? Do we, it's always, editing's always a painstaking process. But luckily we had a wonderful editor and mediator in Stephen Lee, who cut the film and did such a wonderful job with that. But often it would be, the final decision would come down to a vote. And I get the two people that got it, get the cut, at least for that round.
Well, the first draft is what one of our professors referred to as a muscle draft. So you don't stop to think about what you're writing, you just put it down. So the very first draft of this screenplay is like 70 something pages, and it's, in my opinion, truly dreadful. But I ended up writing a whole screenplay, and it was like, oh, okay, and it sort of demystified it. And then you go back and you start adding and changing things. I think the biggest adjustments were when I had the idea for the film. It was on my application to film school all the way in 2011.
10 years ago now.
Huh? 10
years ago now.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And when when we started writing, when I started writing, developing it in my last year at film school, there'd been this great distance between me and Nigeria because we were at school there, and most of my months were spent in New York. So I found myself writing in this vacuum, and I learned that I'm not a writer that can write sort of like in this disembodied way, and I think the early versions of the screenplay were very much missing cultural flourishes and elements. You know, it didn't. I don't know. What do you think, Arie? It didn't feel Nigerian. It was more story based, plot and story heavy. And then I moved back to Nigeria when I was done, and it really took leaps and bounds in those 2 years away from school, being back at home, taking in the rhythms and the pace and the, picking up small words and images and things, and then starting to think more about who these people were. And then you start to composite and remember the people you've met and the people you're meeting. And that's when all the meat arrived onto the screenplay. So it really went through 3 big evolutions, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I was in Nigeria when some of the later drafts were coming, not like the latest, but somewhere in the middle. And yeah, so I was sort of reflecting on some of the things that I was seeing, and how I felt, some scenes maybe needed more cultural context, but just very simple things. Just like, for example, I remember the morning scene. I'll try not to give too much of the film away for those who haven't seen it, but there was a particular scene where there were only a few people coming, or when one of a character was isolated and sort of mourning on his own. And in the film, you see a whole bunch of people around when that's happening. And that was, so it was written with someone in solitude, and with me being back home and understanding sort of how we mourn together and how we mourn as a community. That changed. So it was something that was written very cinematically, and it was sort of very beautiful to have this character isolated in this way. But it was just something that that was just too far removed from the reality. So I remember that scene, for example, changing. But those are the kinds of things that I was contributing, and that just, I was at home at the time and living various experiences, and making things, trying to keep things cinematic but real at the same time.
Yes, it was very important to us. I think part of being away is you get to see how the world views your people. And in the time that we were away in New York, that was really the migrant crisis had sort of reached its apogee and was really just becoming. It was I want to say front web page news. And it was, I felt that these people were never humanized in any way whatsoever. You would just see them in detention camps or in life vests fighting for their lives in the ocean. And then the rhetoric was growing around migration, and they're coming to take jobs and take advantage. And so it was very important for us to at least to show you where these people are coming from, the loved ones they've left behind, and also to humanize them, because they want what every single person on this planet wants, which is the very best that is available to them and their loved ones. And so getting that across was very important to us.